Hi everyone. Today we're going to work through IXL assignment SD2, add and subtract positive and negative fractions. So as a quick reminder, when you're adding and subtracting fractions, you have to make sure that you have a common denominator first. So in this top example right here, 2/5 plus 1/5, because their denominators are the same, we can go ahead and add them because they're being measured out of the same number of pieces, 5 for each. When you add and subtract fractions, you add the numerator only and keep the denominator the same, giving us an answer of 3/5. However, if you're given a problem where the denominators are different, so the second one here, 3/5 minus 1/2, you have to first change one or both of the fractions so they can have a common denominator. One of the ways to do this is by using the least common multiple. So the least common multiple between 5 and 2 is 10. So that means we can multiply our first fraction by 2, giving us 6/10, the second fraction by 5, giving us 5/10. Now that they have a common denominator, we can subtract and get our final answer. The other part of the IXL assignment was not just adding and subtracting fractions, but positive and negative fractions. So our rules for adding and subtracting integers is going to apply when we're dealing with fractions. So remember that when you're adding two numbers that have the same sign, you add them together and keep the sign because you're either continuing down that positive side of the number line or you're continuing down the negative sign. Where we have to pay a little bit more attention is if your signs are different. If your signs are different, you technically subtract and keep the sign of the heavier number, so the greater absolute value. And we can see that here in picture form as well, that if you're adding two numbers and the larger or the heavier number is positive, your answer will be positive because there were more positives to begin with. And then same in this second picture, if the negative number is that greater absolute value, that's why our answer would be negative because there's more of them to begin with. And then lastly, when it comes to subtracting integers, the way that I recommend is to rewrite the subtraction problem as addition, and then you can just follow those adding rules. So subtraction is the same thing as adding the opposite. So if you like acronyms to kind of help remind you on how you can rewrite this problem, so it shows that you're adding the opposite, you can use keep, change, change, where you keep the first number the same, change subtraction to addition, and then change your second number to be the opposite. And then we can follow those rules that we just discussed. So in this case, our numbers have two different signs, a positive 26 and a negative 35. So because they're different, that negative is saying, hold up, do the opposite of addition, which is subtraction. Or another way to think of it is that negative is saying you're taking away 35 pieces from your 26. That negative is that takeaway. So 26 minus 35 would be 9. And then it would in fact be a negative 9 because the 35 is the larger absolute value. There were more of the negative 35s than there were the positive 26s, giving us an answer of negative 9. All right, let's switch on over to IXL and we can put these two concepts together and practice adding and subtracting signed fractions. All right, here we are in IXL, SD2, add and subtract positive and negative fractions. As always, my quick little plug at the beginning, make sure you remember that IXL has an awesome help video and a way to learn with examples, so you can always use those resources as well. All right, if we look at our first problem here, we have 1/8 plus 3/8. So I do notice that both of my numbers are positive, so I don't really need to worry about my signs because they have the same sign and they're both positive. It's, what we're a bit more familiar with seeing. So therefore, the only thing I need to look at is, are the denominators the same? Because in order to add or subtract fractions, they must have like denominators. They in fact do, which means we can get started right away with adding, and we add the numerator only. So 1 plus 3 would be 4, giving us the fraction of 4/8. Now, this IXL assignment will accept the answer as 4/8 as a correct answer, or it will allow the simplified version as well. Since this IXL assignment is specifically focusing on the addition and subtraction, that's why they would accept this answer as correct. But if you're able to simplify, that's always good practice. You might as well go ahead and do so. So let's go ahead and simplify this one real quick. What do 4 and 8 have in common? You can either look for the GCF and divide by the greatest common factor, or you can potentially do repeated division and just keep dividing until you no longer can divide. Well, I see that both 4 and 8 have a factor of 4 in common. I can divide them both by 4. So when we do that, 4 divided by 4 is 1, 8 divided by 4 is 2, giving us a simplified answer of 1/2. Then when we come over to IXL, the way that we can enter our fraction is with the backslash. So it is with the question mark button on your keyboard, and we can enter it as 1/2, or I could have put in 4/8. Either one will be marked as correct. All right, let's try this one. So now we do have a signed fraction. We have a positive 1/5 and a negative 4/5. So when I look at these, I need to still, even though one is positive, one's negative, I still need to make sure that they have like denominators. And thankfully they do. So that means we can just get started right away. Remember that when your numbers have opposite signs, you technically subtract and keep the sign of the heavier number. So we'll subtract our numerators. 4 minus 1 is 3. 4 is the heavier number, otherwise known as the larger absolute value, and because 4 was negative, that means our answer would be negative. I just realized I wrote the problem wrong. Thankfully, I solved it correctly. So my apologies, 1/5 plus negative 4/5. The denominators are the same. Because the signs are different, we subtract. 4 minus 1 is 3. The 4 is the heavier number, and that was negative, meaning our answer will be negative. And whenever you have a negative with fractions, you can write it like this, with the negative in the numerator, or you can write it where it's out front. Both of these forms are acceptable, and you'll see problems written both ways. But in this case, there's really only one way to write it because of how we have to type it, giving us that negative 3/5. Ooh, now we have a subtraction problem. First thing I'm going to do is remember that when you have a subtraction problem with integers, or in this case, a subtraction problem with a negative fraction, we're going to rewrite it as adding the opposite. So as soon as you see a subtraction problem, if you have a negative number in there, rewrite it as adding the opposite. So we keep the first fraction the same, change our subtraction to addition, and change this number to have the opposite sign. Now that we've done that and we've confirmed that the denominators are the same, we can add. With it being rewritten, we can easily see that both of these numbers have the same sign. They're both negatives. So remember, when our signs are the same, we add and keep the sign the same because we're continuing down that same side of our number line. So -1 plus -1 would be -2/4. And then this could simplify to -1/2. Just to prove to you that IXL accepts either answer, I'm going to put in the unsimplified version. And there we go, it still marked it as correct. All right, let's try one more, and then we will look at some with unlike denominators. So 1/8 minus a negative 3/8. Once again, I see it's a subtraction problem. So just like that previous one, whenever you see subtraction, we're going to rewrite it as adding the opposite. So keep the first fraction the same, change subtraction to addition, and change the sign of the second number. So this negative 3/8 would become a positive 3/8. Look at that. Both of my signs are positive, so we can add and keep it positive. 3 plus 1 is 4, giving us 4/8, otherwise known as 1/2. And IXL will accept either answer. All right, next up we have a problem with unlike denominators. So even though my denominators are not alike, I'm going to choose to rewrite my problem first so I don't have to worry about my signs, and then I'll make them the same. It doesn't really matter what you do first as long as you ensure that you both get your signs right and you make sure the denominators are alike. So if we rewrite this problem, we have negative 1/4 minus 1/2. I see that it's subtraction, so I'm going to rewrite as adding the opposite. So negative 1/4 plus a negative 1/2. There's a couple different strategies that you can use to make your denominators the same. One strategy is by finding the least common multiple. And that's what I'll go ahead and do here. So we'll list the multiples of both denominators. So our multiples of 2 would be 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. Our multiples of 4 would be 4, 8, 12, 16, and so on. In order to help with simplifying, if you pick the least common multiple as your common denominator, it's going to help you out in the end. I can see here they both have a 4 in common. So that means I need to ensure that both of my fractions here have a denominator of 4. Thankfully, our first fraction already has a denominator of 4, so we don't need to change that at all. It can stay a negative 1/4. But our second fraction, the negative 1/2, I need to rewrite this so it can have a denominator of 4. Well, 2 times 2 is 4. We can multiply this entire fraction by 2, giving us negative 2/4. Now we can add our fractions. Both of my signs are the same. They're both negative, so we're going to add it and keep it negative, giving us a negative 3/4. And because I chose the least common denominator, and also I was adding small numbers, I didn't have to simplify at the end. So that is a perk. You sometimes will still have to simplify, but it lessens your chances because you're dealing with smaller numbers. So negative 3/4 would be our answer. All right, let's try this one. We're wanting to subtract 3/8 minus negative 1/2. Again, I'm going to choose to deal with my signs first. I see that it's subtraction. Let's rewrite this as adding the opposite. So 3/8 plus, and then the opposite of a negative 1/2 would be a positive 1/2. Another strategy for getting the denominators to be the same is just instead of listing your multiples, just seeing if you're able to kind of mentally do that in your head and look at both the 2 and the 8 and see what they have in common. Well, I know that I can turn 2 and 8 by multiplying by 4. So that happens to be the least common multiple. So instead of listing them all out, sometimes you can just look at it and figure it out if you're quick with your multiplication facts. So I know that if I multiply 2 by 4, it will have a denominator of 8, ensuring that they match. Remember, you always have to multiply the entire fraction because whenever you are increasing it or simplifying, so decreasing it, you have to change that entire fraction so it stays equivalent, it stays equal. So 1 times 4 is 4, 2 times 4 is 8. And now if we add these together, add the numerator only because it's out of 8 pieces. We have 3 out of 8 pieces here, 4 out of 8 pieces here. Together, we now have 7/8, 7 out of 8 pieces. All right, let's do 2 more questions together. So our question here is negative 3/4 minus negative 1 and 1/4. So I see that I have a subtraction problem. I'm going to rewrite that as adding the opposite. Negative 3/4 plus the opposite of negative 1/4 is a positive 1/4. In this case, I'm back to having like denominators, so I don't need to do that extra step. Whenever your numbers have opposite signs, a -3, a +1, remember to technically subtract, giving us 2, and you keep the sign of the heavier number. The 3 is heavier than 1, giving us a -2/4, otherwise known as a -1. All right, for our last question here, we have -9/10 plus -9/10. It's an addition problem, so I don't need to do any rewriting. Also, my denominators happen to be the same, so don't need to do anything there. We can just add straight across. -9 plus -9 is a -18/10. Once again, IXL will accept this improper fraction as correct since the main focus is on the addition and subtraction and working with those positives and negatives. But if you would like to go ahead and simplify it, you can. I do not think that it accepts mixed numbers though. I'm actually not sure, so let's try it. Okay, so if we were to simplify this and keep it as an improper fraction, both 18 and 10 have a factor of 2, so we can divide that by 2, giving us -9/5. And then if we were to convert this into a mixed number, we can do so by dividing. 5 can go into 9 evenly 1 time, and that leaves us with the remainder of 4, so we have -1 and 4/5. Let's see if IXL accepts a mixed number, -1 space 4/5. It does, okay, awesome. So we could have entered that answer unsimplified, simplified, but still as an improper fraction, or in its completely simplified form as a mixed number. So that's actually really good to know that on this assignment, it will accept any of the 3 forms. All right, it is your guys' turn to now go ahead and try this. I think that you will rock it out and do great. Just really watch those positives and negatives. If you need to, use a whiteboard, work it out on paper, just to make sure that you don't lose your signs or accidentally make a mistake. All right, you have an awesome rest of your day, and if you need anything, email me or come to a help session. Bye.